Joining me now is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who served as the Director of European Affairs for the National Security Council in Trump's first administration. He was fired after testifying at Donald Trump's impeachment hearing. He is the author of the new book, The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. Thank you very much for being with us, Alexander. The president just said moments ago in the Oval Office, I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm aligned with the U.S. and the good of the world. How do you see things going so far right now?
Clearly, the subtitle couldn't be more accurate, but I should have used the present tense or future tense. It continues to deceive itself about Russia and continues to betray Ukraine. We seem to be repeating the same mistakes over and over. The Russians do, too, to their own detriment. I mean, they've been fighting to dominate this portion of the world for centuries. Ukraine spun off about 30 plus years ago, and in a moment of Russian weakness and in a moment of strength, Russia has attempted to recapture it, not recognizing that Ukraine will continue to fight for its sovereignty and independence. Ukraine has massive agency. The Europeans have massive agency. They will not willingly or easily allow Russia to score or win here, because they understand that this is destabilizing and inspires Russia to continue to engage in military aggression. And the U.S. is also engaging in a lot of, foolhardy repetition of mistakes, catering to Russia, believing that Russia is willing to make a deal, believing that Russia is willing to forsake empire, including control over this most important portion of the former empire of Russia and the Soviet Union, with nothing to show for it, nothing to demonstrate that it actually will be a fair actor. Peter Baker mentioned all those different times that Russia has lied about its security or playing a benign actor in its backyard. And Donald Trump, who's had 4 years of experience with Putin as president during a period in which Russia was waging war against Ukraine, seems to have learned nothing from this. This current arrangement, this meeting between Zelensky and Trump, is a good thing, frankly. I think it's anytime you put somebody like a European leader or Zelensky in front of Trump, they're going to chip away at at least briefly, because there always seems to be a reversal at his perceptions that he should be siding with Putin instead of with our teammates, the Europeans and Ukraine. So this deal to entice the U.S. for a mutual benefit economic investment is also a good thing. It is not a loss. Ukraine doesn't have as weak a hand as I think a lot of folks understand, mainly because they're the ones that are fighting on the ground. They don't want the U.S. to depart. They don't want the U.S. to alleviate the sanctions on Russia, but they are not. They will continue to fight despite whatever actions the U.S. takes until they make their own decision that they can't do that any longer. And with the Europeans in that corner, it's not that easy.
Colonel, I was just speaking to Kira Rudik, a member of the Parliament of Ukraine, just in the last hour. And one of the things she was really, insistent on is that the only positive, true, permanent solution to Ukraine's sovereignty going forward is if Ukraine is part of NATO. I'm just wondering, is that, do you think, Colonel? I mean, that's clearly one of the issues that Russia has been talking about. And Putin has been saying forever that under no circumstances should or could Ukraine ever be a part of NATO. But barring that, what is the possible strengthening of the future of Ukraine?
Long term, there are no real other solutions besides security guarantees in NATO. But in the short term, if you understand the facts on the ground, that Russia is not as strong as it portrays itself to be. It's got its chest puffed up. It's trying to show that it's winning. It's making tiny gains at an enormous cost. It does not have the staying power to go on indefinitely if the U.S. maintains its sanctions, if the Ukrainians continue to enjoy the support that they're getting from both the U.S. and the European Union and NATO. Under those conditions, Russia really doesn't have the staying power to go on that much longer. It's losing enormous amounts of troops. It's digging into Soviet stockpiles. Really, it's about making sure that the U.S. doesn't make a hard break. It did so diplomatically by siding with Putin earlier this week at the UN. It was a disgusting turn of events, but it hasn't on the security assistance side. and it hasn't alleviated the pain on Russia with regards to sanctions. As long as Trump stays on sides for some time longer, the Europeans continue to ramp up support. I think this is long-term a losing battle for Russia. They'll have to sue for peace. The bottom line for me is, this book that I wrote is about not repeating the same mistakes of the past, not succumbing to these sweetheart deals, these dangles, these promises that Putin's been throwing in front of presidents on both sides, Democrat and Republican, and really not succumbing to fears that when we get to this phase, it will happen when Putin starts to do some nuclear saber rattling, some threatening, that we hold our ground and that we defend our interests, and we, through those means, we make sure that the U.S. is more secure, that we maintain our partnerships with the Europeans that are the bedrock of our prosperity. That's the reason I wrote this book, and that's why I think it's an important conversation to have now, today.
Yeah, but Colonel, there are those who say it's a little bit of folly to underestimate the Russian regime's ability to remain in power. Whereas it's true that sanctions have affected large parts of the economy of Russia, there are newly minted billionaires that are making hundreds of millions of dollars a year getting natural resources, oil and gas out of Russia, selling it in the world black market, making billions of dollars. A lot of that money is going into the Russian regime. Do you not see the possibility that maybe Putin doesn't have the pressures that people in Western Europe or here in the United States would have?
He absolutely does have the pressures. It's not something that threatens his regime. There is no indicator, and I've been saying this for years, since the beginning. There's no indicator that his regime itself is at the tipping point. But there is a different calculus about whether it still makes sense for Russia to engage in this war, and that becomes much, much more complex. Yes, there are new billionaires. Yes, there have been folks that have profited off this war. But the tolerance that the Russian people have for pain, as high as it is not inexhaustible. They are losing too many people. The Russians don't necessarily have the staying power, even though they have a much larger population than Ukraine, to continue to draw tens of thousands of troops on a monthly basis, let alone a potential mass mobilization to really achieve any military breakthroughs. And the economic impacts are also, the Russian economy it looks in certain regards like it's teetering. That is because inflation is sky high. That is because they don't have any capital that they can, there's only so much time or so much resources that you could apply for war when you have other obligations. So it is much, much closer. There's a lot of hubris from the U.S. and Russia. And I think the Ukrainians have a lot of agency.